Floods. So how do you financially prepare yourself for disaster? Our friend Chase Wilsey with Wilsey Asset Management joining us now. Chase, good morning.
Good morning.
We promise we'll keep this about finances and not make you do any kind of weather forecasting or anything like that.
I appreciate it. That's not my forte.
One of the things that we've learned the last couple of weeks, what people get wrong in terms of insurance.
Yeah.
And by the time they learn that lesson, it's sometimes too late. What advice do you have?
I have a couple of thoughts that people should really consider when they're looking at insurance. And the first one I always tell people is you got to understand what's covered. A lot of people don't realize just with a basic homeowner's policy, let's say, many times flood, like we've seen here now, earthquake, fire are all not covered in a basic policy. So you have to understand, again, what does your policy actually cover? Because you could be totally misguided in thinking, oh, I had this huge flood and I had, some pieces of furniture in the house that got completely destroyed and it's okay, I have insurance, and all of a sudden it's not covered. So make sure you understand what's covered.
There's a reason sometimes that it's complicated because most people are just say, I got insurance, check.
Yeah.
They don't do that, and it's not their fault. It's not easy, and it's super complicated. Can you also have too much insurance though?
Yeah, you can always be overinsured, and I say that because you could be essentially just wasting money towards premiums. Yeah. So I always tell people you have to understand the relationship between the deductible and the premium. Now the deductible is what you're gonna have to pay before insurance kicks in. Now a lot of times you're like, oh, I want a really low deductible, but then that means your premiums are higher. Right. So you really have to look and say, okay, well, what can I afford if everything hits the fan and all of a sudden I do have to pay out of pocket? Let's say you have a $10,000 deductible. Now that's not normal for a homeowner's policy, but let's just say for simplicity, you have a $10,000 deductible, but you only have $5,000 in the bank. That's a problem.
That is a problem. That's a lot of math that has to go into this, and that is a problem.
Exactly.
Let's talk about renter's insurance. That also has come up the last couple of weeks. People realize, oh, I don't have renter's insurance.
And renter's insurance, same thing as homeowner's insurance. Flood is normally not covered in renter's insurance. Most renter's insurance policies. So you have to understand, renter's insurance, the nice thing is generally going to be cheaper than homeowner's insurance because you're not insuring the actual physical structure. That's what your landlord is for. Yeah. So I think like right now the average is like $14 a month for renter's insurance.
Not bad.
But that's just going to cover what you have essentially inside the house from things like theft, if you have a pipe burst, things like that. And you have to understand a couple key areas here as well. One thing I like to point out is the replacement cost. For example, if you have a sofa, let's say you paid, just make it easy, $2,000 for a sofa, but you've had it for 10 years. Well, that sofa is not worth $2,000 anymore. If it gets ruined, you might get a check for, let's say, a couple $100. Right. But you're like, whoa, that's not what I paid for it. Now I got to buy a new sofa. You have to understand the replacement cost. Right. You can pay up for that with your insurance company. Generally, I would say I don't recommend that because most of the time that's not going to happen. The other thing you have to understand too is, again, what is covered. A lot of times renter's insurance policies have limits on, high ticket items like jewelry, watches, where all of a sudden you have this really nice Rolex, let's say. Right. All of a sudden it gets ruined in a pipe burst, gets ruined, you have issues. Now all of a sudden they're limiting that. You can't go replace that. So you want to be very upfront and real with your insurance company about things that you want covered because you might have to pay extra for high valuable goods.
Oh, the fine print just every time. Let's talk about saving for a rainy day. The best way to put aside funds for a disaster. You mentioned just a few seconds ago, like, oh, what about if that deductible is 10 grand, you only got 5 in the bank? It's a matter of just kind of saving up and just in case.
Yeah, it always comes back down to understanding your cash flow, understanding your balance sheet. What are those potential liabilities that could be coming due? What do you have in the bank? Also, people forget about credit lines. If you have an investment account, you could have a credit line against that. You could have a credit line against your house. So that presents also more liquidity options. But frankly, I want to tell people as well is, make sure you have, let's say, a good insurance agent you can trust, but also potentially a good financial planner that's unbiased and going to be able to provide input. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to knock insurance agents, but they do have a bias in what should be sold. So you kind of want two parties to counterbalance that to make sure you are insured properly.
People a little leery of that kind of certain industries because they have trust issues. Sometimes I have that as well. But you need the experts to help you out in cases like this.
You said a lot of fine print.
Fine print. Chase Wilsey, we thank you as always. Good advice.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Still ahead here.